Chicago's long history of housing discrimination is just one of the factors making the city among the most segregated in the country. Joining us now to talk about how racism and segregation in housing have impacted their lives are Karen Freeman Wilson, former mayor of Gary, Indiana, who's now the president and CEO of the Chicago Urban League; Ted Richards, originally from Rochester, New York, who lives with his family in the Jackson Park Highlands neighborhood, also known as South Shore; and Tia Brown, who lives with her family in Chicago Lawn on the southwest side of the city. Thanks to the three of you for joining us. Tia Brown, let's start with you, please. You grew up on the west side, you work on the west side, you have very deep connections to that part of the city and that community. You wanted to buy a home on the west side, but it proved difficult for you. What was the main reason that you were unable to do that?
Well, initially, it was trying to locate a home that was affordable for us. A lot of the homes during that time, gentrification was just starting in that area, in the Austin area. So a lot of the homes were really worn down. They really needed a lot of work, and they still wanted $250,000 for them. So that was an issue for us because we were approved for $250,000. So to buy a home that's already 200 and knowing that we have to put even more into it, that kind of deterred us and made us have to go and look elsewhere for housing.
Now, in the series, you also talk about one instance in particular. An owner refused to show you a home because you're Black. You later learned that. What had been your experience in searching for housing on the South Side?
Well, initially, it was going okay. I think that opened our eyes to a lot of injustices and things that we were kind of happily going about the home buying process. Even though we weren't able to purchase out west, it was still going good. When we went to the home, he initially was talking to our realtor, who was Hispanic. And I don't think he knew that we were African American. Once we arrived to his home, tried to get in, he wouldn't give us the lock code. Once I spoke to him, later on, he spoke to my landlord again, or he was our landlord at the time, our realtor, and he told them that he didn't think that it was a good fit for us because he wasn't really looking for an African-American family to be in the home. So, and it was Chatham, so it was the African-American neighborhood.
So we spoke with Chicago's Housing Commissioner, Marisa Novara, and asked her about how the city's new blueprint for fair housing could address the kind of experience that you had. And here's a bit of what she said.
We do have a measure in the blueprint for fair housing that lays out some steps that the commission will take to increase funding for nonprofits to do the kind of testing and enforcement that if, say, this couple had reached out and said, I think we were discriminated against, I think that this owner or this realtor did not show us the house we wanted to see because of our race, then they are then paid to go out and do an investigation on that.
Tia Brown, does that response give you any sort of hope that the city is working to address its racial discrimination in housing like what you experienced?
Hope, yes. I love that there is some kind of initiative in place. But honestly, I don't know if that would really deter any of the homeowners from discriminating against people, just to know that someone will come out eventually and may investigate. So, I mean, I don't know if it's much that can be done, especially when the homeowners ultimately have the choice of who they want to sell to. But I do appreciate that they do have something in place that will help us in some kind of way address it.
So, Ted Richards, you're white, as we mentioned. You're from Rochester, New York, originally. Your wife is African American, born and raised on the South Side. You're currently living in the Jackson Park Highlands area of South Shore, but you all are thinking of moving. Tell us why you're thinking of moving and why it's important to stay on the South Side.
Well, we're most familiar with the South Side. Like you said, my wife is born and raised in the South Side. I originally came to Chicago as a student at the University of Chicago, so that was kind of my area I was most familiar with. And for us, I think it's really important for us, for our children, to be raised in their community and around their culture and to feel like they're safe. And so we deal with violence in a few different ways. We deal with the violence of kind of like a neighborhood that's been completely disinvested in, South Shore. There's very little in terms of jobs or other amenities. But moving our children into a predominantly white space is also not an option for us because there's a violence in that for them. So we're kind of trying to find that right fit for us. We're disappointed with kind of like the way that South Shore, which is a beautiful neighborhood in many ways, but really has not seen any investment at all since we've been here. We've been here about 7 years and we've seen very little investment. So, but we're still committed to living on the South Side for sure.
And let's talk about that a little bit because, you've talked about your frustration at the lack of investment that you see in your community. How do you see, racial discrimination and housing segregation sort of playing into that lack of investment you see?
Well, I mean, I've been here. I first came here in the 90s and was pretty familiar with the way that the university had the University of Chicago had a very adversarial relationship with the community. I mean, I was told my freshman orientation very clearly which streets not to go past. And even though they didn't say it was because it was Black people there, it was clear that that was the reason. It was obvious to me. I didn't know a lot of things as an 18-year-old, but I knew that much. And, so we've watched as the university has sort of expanded its area, and you see more people that are affiliated with the university or, as was mentioned in other segments, sort of like young white professionals moving into certain areas, and that's where the money goes. In neighborhoods like South Shore, you simply don't see any of that investment. And we've seen more boarded up storefronts than we saw when we first moved in here. So,
I want to get Karen Freeman Wilson in here. If you could, help our viewers sort of understand why segregation is about more than just people living separately, and a bit to Ted's point, about how segregation undermines the economics for many Black communities.
Segregation absolutely undermines the economics, and it does that because of what Ted has just talked about, which is the disinvestment. You see developers making decisions based on where they think they can make the most money. And it's also almost a circular impact because of hundreds of years and decades of discrimination. We now know that developers don't see the South Side and certain portions of the West Side as a good investment opportunity. And that's really what I think the city was trying to do through Invest Southwest, in many ways incentivize, but also say to developers, we're going to do business in a different way. We're going to offer investment opportunities based on a different rubric. But in addition to that, you have to intentionally combat these decades of discrimination. That's what the Department of Transportation's Justice 40 initiative is, because what we've seen is that the professionals who impact demand, I'm talking about the realtors, the appraisers, the lenders, the urban planners, all of those professionals who have created this really institutional racism that will cause people to say, my money is better spent here on the North Side than it is on the South Side. They have to either be forced through the fair housing law, until there is a remedy for you that will cause them to pay, because they have to be made to pay. That's the only thing that impacts certain people. If they have to pay for ignorance, then they will then learn to do better, even if their heart doesn't change.
And it sounds like the two of you should probably connect so that Karen, you can let her know how she can get to that. But before we run out of time, I want to ask you one last question. How does segregation impact the ability of Black families to grow wealth in about 45 seconds?
Well, if your value of your home is depressed because of segregation, then you can't get a home improvement loan. You can't do anything that people typically are able to do by borrowing on their home equity. It impacts the equity of your home. And so you're not able to educate your kids, start a business, do all of the other things that most people can do with home equity.
Okay, that's where we'll have to leave it. My thanks to Karen Freeman Wilson, Ted Richards, and Tia Brown for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you.